we're here at the Dead Sea Scrolls Lab of the Israel Antiquities Authority, where we care for the collection of 25,000 roughly fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But for the most part, the Dead Sea Scrolls date to later periods, the Second Temple period, the period of the Second Revolt, the Byzantine period. Here today we have revealed to the press one of only three documents dating to the First Temple period, okay? So roughly 2,700, 2,600 years ago. The document is written on papyrus. It contains 4 lines, which were deciphered by Professor Shmuel Achituv of the Ben Gurion University of the Negev, written in ancient Paleo-Hebrew, and the type of writing can be very securely dated to the late First Temple period. In addition to that, we sampled the papyrus using C14, and it was found to date to the same period, so we have a good idea of its dating. The document is some kind of letter between that's sent by one individual within the administration of the period to another individual. We know the name of the receiving end, Le Yishmael, to Yishmael. So he's receiving the letter, and then the letter continues to say Tishlach, send. So he's being asked or ordered, depending on how you look at it, to send some sort of commodities. The edges of the papyrus are cut, and so we don't know exactly what was being asked to be sent, but this is obviously some kind of communication between 2 officials within the administration of the First Temple period. As I noted before, it's only one of 3, so it's very, very, very unique. The document was actually has an interesting history in terms of what happened after its discovery. We don't know exactly when it was discovered, but in the 60s, a woman from America, from the United States, was visiting Israel. She was obviously interested in archaeology because she actually participated in excavations as a volunteer, and at some point she makes contact with 2 individuals, one who is an antiquities dealer who's involved in a lot of the dealings of the Dead Sea Scrolls at the time, and the other is the curator of the Rockefeller Museum, and they sell her or give her this small fragment, which she takes back to the US and glues it onto a background and hangs it with a picture of these 2 individuals in her house. The woman later passes away. She hands it down to her son. And after many years, I would say roughly about 50 years since she hung it in her living room, it comes to the awareness of epigraphists who become aware of the existence of this papyrus. They contact the anti-robbery unit of the Israel Antiquities Authority, who together contact the individual and bring him to our unit, to our laboratories, to see the actual papyrus and to also show him where we can keep it best. And he's convinced at that time that this is the place to preserve this document. And so he hands over the document to the Israel Antiquities Authority, where it's kept, where it's conserved, where it's documented, and where it will remain so that it lives on for many, many, many years forward.
Have you ever had any other documents brought to your lab in this way?
Well, not exactly in this way, but for example, several years ago, the anti-robbery unit of the Israel Antiquities Authority, through a sting operation, was actually able to obtain another papyrus, also dating to the First Temple period, which is actually the earliest mention of Jerusalem in ancient Hebrew script. This is also some kind of receipt or administrative document of the sending of commodities from one place to the other, the second place being Jerusalem. And so it's quite unique. This doesn't happen often, but our team at the Israel Antiquities Authority is working very hard to begin with, to reach the artifacts before they're looted, and that's what the team has been doing for several years now, and which brought to us scroll fragments from the Cave of Horror very recently, and also tracking down looters in order to stop them and obtain what they have discovered.
So how many similar fragments do you think are out there in the hands of regular individuals?
Well, it's difficult to know for sure. I would think that the numbers are not large. The anti-theft unit, the anti-robbery unit at the Israel Antiquities Authority is working hard to track down the few that there are using various modes of operation, which I won't discuss here. And I think that it's not a very, very broad phenomenon.
Of all of the First Temple period fragments you have, what is the most common medium for them to be on?
Well, the issue with papyrus is that it's made from organic material which would have disappeared over time in a normal climate. And so the only place to find it is the dry desert climate. We do know that there were many other such documents. For example, even in Jerusalem, there are probably dozens, if not hundreds of such documents. And the way we know this is that although we don't have the papyrus that survived the document itself, what we do have that survived are the small sealings that are made of clay that were used to seal the documents and were stamped with the names of the administrators who sealed the document. And so these actually small sealings indicate to us that there were probably hundreds, if not more, such documents roaming around in different sites. The issue with the papyrus is, of course, an issue of preservation, and therefore it's only able to be found in the Judean Desert.
So would those other Jerusalem documents have been on papyrus also?
Well, when we look at the sealings, our first catch is what's, with the writing on it to decipher the names on them. But if you flip them over, you can actually see the imprint of papyrus. And so we know papyrus was the primary medium for writing in that period of documents. And this shouldn't surprise us because it's also the primary medium in other areas, for example, Egypt. And the connections between Egypt and Judah and Israel or Canaan as a whole are very, very close in the Bronze and Iron Ages.
Your team is working really hard to collect fragments from around the Judean Desert. Can you speak on that?
Well, as a result of obtaining the Jerusalem papyrus, which I mentioned before, as well as other finds in catching antiquities looters in action, the IAA anti-robbery unit decided that in order to really do their job best, they needed to preempt the robbery. And so they actually went on beginning with a survey of the entire Judean Desert, surveying to see where artifacts were still able to be found and conducting excavations at different points where they thought artifacts could be found. Some of the more exciting artifacts that were found were a very, very large straw basket from the Neolithic period, as well as the scroll fragments I mentioned before. And many of those findings will be presented next Thursday, September 15th, at a special conference that the IAA is having at the Bible Lands Museum, where many of these finds and the project will be presented.